Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing my ultimate favourite books of all time. This is across all subgenres. I'm not discriminating against anybody. Multiple authors could feature in this list. Not saying that they do, but they could. This is just the ultimate list of my 10 favourite books, regardless of author, regardless of genre, regardless of whether it's a series or a standalone, it doesn't matter. This is just my ultimate list. So let's jump in. In 10th place, we have A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay. I love this book. It's a book that I still think about. It's a book that I devoured last year. It made my top list of last year. It's made my top fantasy list of this year. And it is now on my top list of books across all genres. And there's a reason why, and it's because the writing is beautiful, the world is compelling, the characters are just so engrossing, like the characters that I actually think about. Adria is a character that I still think about so much. And it's a world that feels almost like home, like it just feels like a place that I would love to go to at one point. Which is funny because I think it's based on like Renaissance Italy, which is one of my favourite periods of history. So there's a reason why. But it's just everything about it is perfection. Everything about it makes sense and everything about it works. It is a perfect fantasy book. And I think it's a perfect entryway into Guy Gavriel Kay if you haven't read any of his books. And I think it's also a really great kind of maybe slightly more advanced beginner, I wouldn't say it's a great book to start with if you're a complete beginner to fantasy, but if you've read a few fantasy books and you want to delve a little bit more into the genre, I think this is a really, really, really great book to read once you've got a bit more experience. I also think this book reads a lot like historical fiction, so if you don't even like fantasy, it's very, very, very light on the fantasy element. So I think if you are somebody who doesn't read fantasy typically, you like historical fiction, contemporary classics, this is also a book that you will love because it hits all the notes. And my gosh, it's a masterpiece, actual masterpiece. All right, in 9th place, we have a sci-fi book, and that is Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. Love this book. I read this book this year, and it changed my life, like genuinely. I'm not being like melodramatic here. I think all the books on this list did change my life in one way or another, but Dune Messiah really made me think about like what makes leaders, like what makes a leader a good leader, what makes somebody be good at ruling. Like it made me think about that months after I finished reading the book, and it's still something that I think about a lot now, and I just loved it. I ate it up. I loved being in Paul's head, and I just think it was such a interesting insight and analysis of like what it means to be somebody who rules other people. Like, I feel like every political reader should read this book because it's genuinely fascinating. It's all about human nature. It's all about how we communicate ideas. It's about how we bring people together. And, it's almost like a sociological treatise, an anthropological, sociological treatise with some kind of philosophical elements to it. And that is the sort of stuff that I love in my books, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. And I just ate it up, absolutely ate it up, absolute perfection. Next up, we have a classic, and it's a book that I've been talking about a lot on my channel, and I will until the day I die, and that is Stoner by John Williams. This book is incredible. Like, it's just incredible. It's also a masterpiece, and there's a reason why it's a masterpiece, and that is that it's an extraordinary story about an incredibly ordinary man. And I think it paints such a vivid picture of this individual and why he is the way he is, but yet it shines a lens and a light on, at least for me, why I do the things the way I do them and why other people might also do things the way they do them. I just think it's such a fantastic study of human beings and like human nature. You'll see a common theme across all of these books, but it really is like it's such a wonderful, detailed insight into humanity and like what makes humans human, and it normalizes it as well. Like it really normalizes how this character is portrayed as well, because I think there's a lot of negativity when someone is presented to us as being average and someone is presented to us as being passive in their life. And yet Williams isn't necessarily making a statement on whether it's good or bad. He's just showing us that this is who this person is and this is how he lives his life and this is how he feels as a result of that. And then he lets us come to our own conclusion. Like I just think that's remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Absolutely stunning writing. It's like a poem. Like it's just so beautifully written. It's perfection. You're going to hear me say it's perfection probably after every single book. So just bear that in mind. In 7th place, we have The Folding Knife by KJ Parker. This book is incredible. This book genuinely changed my life because I identify with Basso in so many ways. I wouldn't say I'm a sociopath though. I like to think I'm not. But in every other way, I identify with Basso. I think he's such a fascinating individual. He's somebody that I think about a lot, like genuinely. And the reason why I find him so fascinating is that he's someone whose own hubris impacts him negatively. His own hubris ends up biting him in the arse. And we see that happen in real life, right? Like we see that happen all the time. And I just loved being in this incredibly intelligent individual's mind, but then seeing him do things that didn't match up with his intelligence, if that makes sense. I also quite like seeing the kind of apathetic nature of his personality. I wouldn't say I'm apathetic, just to be clear. I don't identify with him in that way. But he is very apathetic towards people in particular. And I do really like seeing how he evolves from this young man into this incredibly ferocious, intelligent leader, and how he as a person changes as he goes through that journey. Like, again, another really fascinating character study, a really fascinating insight into what it takes to be somebody who has to lead nations. Absolutely fascinating and also perfect. Also perfect. Another really great one, if you're like a historical fiction fan, very, very low on fantasy. There's like no fantasy in it. Very much a kind of historical fiction book, I would say, set in a like made up world. But really, this is a character study, this book. And I think if you're somebody who likes character-driven stories, you have to read this book because Parker shows you how it's done. The only thing I will mention is I loved a lot of the context and kind of background information that we get around like mercantile banks and how economies are run and how goods are shipped between nations, like these things. A lot of people aren't going to find that interesting, but if you like economics, you'll love it. 100% The Folding Knife deserves its place on this list. Next up, we have Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is a fantasy book. This is the second book in the First Law trilogy, and it's perfect. It's perfect. I've read every single Abercrombie book bar his YA series, which I will read at some point. And this is just the perfect book. It's just perfect. The character development, the tropes that are used in this book, like everybody, the gang kind of coming together and going on a journey. I don't actually normally like the journey trope, but it just worked in the story. The intimate nature of how the story is told, you know, the insight that we get into some of the most incredible characters ever written. Logan Ninefingers, Glocta are two examples. Like just really, really detailed insight into how these people work. And it's just perfect. It is absolutely perfect. A lot of people complain about the first book not really having any direction, but this book kind of takes the story in a kind of different way. And I just think the way that Abercrombie wrote it and the way that it's paced and the way that it's just this really intimate insight into the nature of human relationships is just a seriously huge achievement. Like, it's a masterpiece, that book, and people should study it. Like, I genuinely think fantasy authors should study that book because it's just perfection. Like, everything is done right. The dialogue is hilarious. It's witty. The action scenes actually feel like you're there. It's very, very well paced. We have quiet moments, action moments, all kind of jumbled in with each other. And it's just perfect. Like, I could just talk about this book for hours because it's just perfection. Like, it's so good. And it will forever remain my favourite Joe Abercrombie book. I think it would take a serious feat of achievement to knock this off as my favourite Joe Abercrombie book, but it's just perfect. Absolutely perfect. Next up, we have a classic, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And this is probably one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's very emotional, it's very raw, very unfiltered. It's all about like family dynamics, about the American dream. It's about loss, and it's one of those books that I think if you read it at the right time, like it will genuinely change your life. Because as with all of these books, in some way, shape or form, it's really about like human nature and like human relationships, and how we as humans interact with our environment, and how that can either really lead to good things or really bad things. Another reason why I really love this book is the family dynamics in this book, because we are following a family and seeing how they interact with each other, how they change as the book progresses. It's just very raw. And no one, and I will say this probably many times on my channel, no one writes about the human experience quite like John Steinbeck. He has a very, very unique ability to capture humanity in a very unfiltered way. And I've never, ever seen anybody be able to do it in the way that he does it. And it's truly, truly incredible. You know, I've read a few Steinbeck books now, and every single one of them has this. I just think it's bestly represented in East of Eden. But it's just, this book will make you very emotional. Not necessarily like make you cry, but like it will make you think about things maybe you don't want to, but you should. So if you want to be like enlightened, like this is genuinely a book that I would say you should read if you want to feel enlightened. And I feel like a few of the books on this list are like that as well. Like I think Stoner fits into that, and I think my top 3 books also fit into that as well. Like if you want to feel genuinely enlightened, read these books, because it's this book and the ones that I've mentioned are just incredible. Next up, in 4th place, we have another fantasy book, and I have 2 books and I put them on the same kind of line because I can't pick between them. And that is The Warrior Prophet and The Judging by R. Scott Baker. The Warrior Prophet is the 2nd book in the Prince of Nothing trilogy, and The Judging Eye is the 1st book in the 2nd Apocalypse Quartet. I'll give you quick reasoning why they're both on this list. This Warrior Prophet for me was just a masterpiece in how to write incredibly philosophical, dense fantasy fiction that is also very anthropological. You know, it looks again a lot at the same themes that I've mentioned before, which is it really looks at like human nature and how humans work, how nations work, how religions work. Like it's just fascinating. It's set in a fantastical world. It's very much set in a fantasy setting, but there are so many analogues that you can make towards reality. Part of that is because the author based it on actual historical events like the Crusades, but another part of it is because he gets humans. Like Baker understands humanity. Now, a lot of people don't like his books because they're very extreme and they're very dark, but you just have to turn on the news right now and look at what's happening in the world, and you realise that actually what he's written in his books is not at all far-fetched. Just literally go on Sky News, BBC News, CNN, whatever you watch, I don't care. But just go and turn on your news right now, and it honestly feels like we are living in Baker's world. We just don't have the magic. And maybe that's a good thing, actually. But yeah, it's terrifying. The next book is The Judging Eye, and the reason why I love that book so much is because it was perfectly written. Like that book was written just flawlessly. It was executed flawlessly. Every single page mattered. Every single word mattered. It was paced perfectly. The characters that we were introduced to, the new ones were incredible. The old ones were also incredible. Like every single thing worked from like a technical perspective, but it also introduced us to this kind of wider 2nd Apocalypse that has been alluded to in the original Prince of Nothing trilogy. And I just think it was absolutely masterful. Absolutely masterful. I read that book in like 2-3 days, which is unheard of for me when it comes to Baker, because his works are very dense and like very, very hard to get through. I always say read them very slowly because I just think that's the best way to get through them. But that one, I was hooked and I couldn't put it down, and I loved it. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. All right, let's move to the top three. Some of you probably got this. None of them are fantasy, interestingly enough, so there's that. In third place, we have Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This book also changed my life. This book is about intelligence, it's about humanity, it's about family, it's about loss, it's about education. Just so many topics packed into one small book that I am personally very interested in. And so it was a literal dream for me in reality. Like, it was just perfection. The character development, Charlie, our main character, was just heartbreaking in every way. And this book made me cry. Like, it's like, I never cry in books. It's literally unheard of. And this is one of the rare instances where I literally cried at the end of the book, because it was so heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking what happened. And we can see it coming. The funny thing is, we can see it coming, and yet we're hoping that it doesn't. We're hoping that Daniel Keyes is gonna give us a happy ending, but no, he doesn't. It's really about how humans work and how we're often our own worst enemy, and how having intelligence, being aware, can actually be a bad thing in many ways, because you become more privy of all the flaws of humanity in a way. It was just really beautifully written as well, and I think the progression of the book is just a reflection of like the mental state of our main character, and it's just perfect. Like, another masterpiece without a doubt. In second place, we have a book that changed my life. It made me kind of spiritually change. A lot of these books have impacted me like intellectually and like morally and ethically, but this is probably one of the few books that actually impacted me spiritually, and that is Musashi by I.G. Yoshikawa. This is a 1,200 page tome. It is just a manual on how one should live life. And, I haven't read, at least at that point when I read Musashi, I hadn't read any, Japanese fiction. I hadn't read much about kind of the religious beliefs of the Japanese, like Buddhism, especially at that time. I had an idea of what it's like now, but I'd heard of Musashi as a person, but I didn't really know much about the philosophy of his belief system. And so I was really intrigued, and I'm one of these people, like I'm very introspective. I think about these things quite a lot. I think about my values, my beliefs, and I try to think of that independent of any kind of religious or spiritual organization. Like, I tried to, and I know that's pretty much impossible given how many inputs we get into our brain, but I always try to think as independently of any specific group as I possibly can. And then I like to see what my values and my beliefs align with. Secondary almost, whereas I think a lot of people think of it in the inverse way. They find a religion or a spiritual group that they identify with, and then they embody those things. For me, it's the inverse. And I've been doing that a lot, particularly in the last year and a half, 2 years, because I've had a lot of personal change, good change, but a lot of change, more than probably one person should have in such a small amount of time. And so I've been thinking about a lot of these things, like, who am I? What do I believe? What do I, Zara, stand for? Not what do I, Zara, as this group stand for? What do I, Zara, stand for? Just independent of any religious group, political group, anything, And when I read Musashi, a lot of what is talked about in that book really aligned with my personal belief system outside of any external factors. And that was just really weird in a way, it was written in a way that made sense to me, at the core of my heart, without getting too deep into this. And so, it really touched me in a way that I just did not expect, and I think I came off the back of reading that book, which, I read very slowly because I really wanted to soak it in, and I'm sure I barely scraped the surface. I want to read it again next year. But the point I'm trying to make is that it impacted me in a way that, you know, like it literally spoke to my soul. Like it really did. And I think a large part of that is how the story is also told. It's split into 6 books, I think it is, and each book focuses on one phase of Musashi's life. Musashi was a real life person. He was a samurai. He pioneered lots of kind of different fighting styles. He also fought with a wazakashi and a katana, which was very uncommon at that time. Normally people just fought with one katana, but he fought with a katana and a wazakashi. So that was very unique. He kind of pioneered that fighting style. But then he also wrote a lot of philosophy as well. And like I have a few books of his like philosophical sayings and beliefs, like the Book of the Five Rings as an example. The way Yoshikawa writes the book, and bear in mind, obviously I read a translation. One day I would love to read it in Japanese when I'm competent enough to be able to do that. But reading the translation and reading the way the story is told, like we're just following this young man's journey or young boy's journey until he becomes a man, whilst also instilling us with these kind of very deep philosophical reflections, was just the perfect way to get me engrossed. And I think that will work for a lot of people. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily going to have the same impact on you as it did on me. I think it's going to largely depend on like what you're going through on in your own life. But it just opened up my eyes to something that I couldn't necessarily verbalize. Yoshikawa verbalized it in a way that I just never expected. Really changed my life. And yeah, it's a book I'm going to try and read every single year, because it's just so beautiful, like really, really beautiful. All right, I spent ages on that. I don't know why, but there we go. Next up, and if you've been watching my channel even for a small while, you'll know what this book is. And it's going to be no surprise to anybody, and that is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Why do I love this book so much? The central theme of this book is twofold. I think one big part of it is about like discovery and like figuring out who you are, what your place is in wherever you are, right? The second part of it is about like friendship and family, and about being with people who get you, who understand you, who will stand by you no matter what. And that just, both of those things really identify with me. I read this book when I was quite young, and so I think the discovery thing really appealed to me when I was younger. But as I've got older and I've reread it multiple times, the second aspect, the like family, trust, loyalty, friendship, those are the things that have especially appealed to me as I've got older. Both things appeal to me in different ways, but I think as I've gotten older, you know, I'm one of those people that like I have, you know, maybe that many friends. I can count on this hand that are like true friends. I don't just call anybody a friend, you know, there's people that I know, they have like thousands of friends, hundreds of friends, and I'm like, yeah, I have like maybe this many friends. And it's just because I place value on certain relationships, and this is what that book represents to me. It's about 4 brothers, but they're not actually brothers, right? They're 4 guys who come together and they become brothers, and it's about them fighting against bad people. And they're not the best people in the world, let's be honest. They're very questionable themselves sometimes, and I fully accept that. Like I know in some places it hasn't aged very well, but from what I took from this book about friendship and loyalty, about trust, about being there for one another unconditionally, these are all things that I value in my own life. I like to think those are the things that I embody with my own friends and my family, of course. So when you read it in a book like this, it just feels so relatable. It feels like you're home. And that's how I feel when I read this book. I feel like I'm at home, because I know these characters so well. I know this world so well. The characteristics that a lot of these people embody, I like to think I try to exhibit them myself, and I like to think that I do to some extent. It's just like a warm hug. It's just a warm hug. And you know, Dumas was an incredible writer. I really wish one day I could read it in the French, but I don't know French. But it's just such a beautiful story of just people coming together and accepting each other for who they are, despite their flaws, despite all the bad things that they've done, and supporting each other and loving each other unconditionally. And that's what I value, you know, that's what I value. That still takes the top spot. Like, it still very much is my favourite book of all time. So yeah, those are my top 10 favourite books of all time as of November 2023. It wasn't actually as hard to make this list as I thought it would be. It was actually pretty clear cut for me, to be honest. I just loved every single one of these books. Every single one of these books means more to me than I can ever explain and do justice to. And I think you should read every single one of them if you haven't. So let me know down below, what are your like top 10, or if you don't have a top 10, your top 3 books of all time across genres. Be very curious to hear. If any of these made your list, let me know, and I will see you down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.